Hey, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you happenstance into this Truth Bomb riff. And this is a really exciting moment for me. I'm joined by a woman who I've never met, a woman by the name of Karen Jeffers Tracy, who all I know is someone who has commented on many of my Truth Bomb riffs in the past. And sometimes she's critical of things that I have to say. And it's so, I think, important to galvanize with regular people around the country to learn where they're coming from, but to also try to piece together some of the information that I have to see if there's kind of an elevated conversation regarding what it is that I'm attempting to do by reaching tens of millions of you out there. And so this is just a in the moment, on the fly, experiment to see what we come up with. But I do know just a little bit about you, Karen, by way of the fact that you live in the Midwest, and I believe that you're also a professor. And why don't you just tell me a little bit about yourself, and then maybe also, if you wouldn't mind, say how you came to find out about my Truth Bomb riffs, and maybe kind of give me an overview of what you've heard, and what's resonating with you and maybe what's not. Kind of just an overview.
Okay, I'm not a professor. I'm a librarian for a public library, adult services librarian. And my about 10 years ago, I cut my hours so that I could spend half of my time volunteering, teaching the public about climate change. Because at that time, I really saw the whole picture. And so I've lived in
Let
a
me insert something there just real quick. That's why I misinterpreted saying that you might be a professor, because you are teaching people about climate change. But that's fabulous. I love the fact that you're a librarian. But please continue. Sorry to interrupt.
things. And let's see. My interest in your material, it revolves around that, because we can't seem to make any progress on climate change when these giant entities with lots of money are just stalling it and stalling action and putting out billions of dollars in disinformation. People are very confused. I'd say I live in Ohio, and I've done surveys, and I found that, out of 200 people, there were only 2 people who knew the key concepts of climate science that would keep them safe from being just completely distracted by the deniers. You don't know that it's false unless you have some basis in science.
Well, that was probably my first entry point into ultimately the material that I would end up, unfortunately,
Hmm.
becoming an expert in, because I grew up in Houston, Texas, which is kind of the center of the oil and gas universe. That's where all of the decisions are made. I mean, Dallas is up there, but Houston is really the apex of the entire oil and gas industry. And when I grew up there, both my granddad and my dad were both involved with the oil and gas industry at relatively high levels. My granddad was a successful oil broker, so he did deals all over the country and then sold deals all around the world. And then my dad was a general counsel of a large natural gas firm. And when I grew up in Texas, in Houston particularly, I was always astonished, and I loved, and I took great pride in initially, at the power of the universe of Houston, because I was always like, wow, this is intriguing. And particularly when I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, I was one of those people that had aspired to become wealthy and successful. And, somebody who would drive around in a very inexpensive car and a showy house and all of those sorts of things, because that was the community that I grew up with. That's what I understood. But the only reason I bring that up is that the intricacies of understanding the business and lobbying, and then ultimately, many decades later, when I came to understand a lot about finance, but particularly the disinformation as we understood Exxon, that has been revealed really over the course of the last several years, or maybe even the last 10 years. But we know that Exxon knew about climate change going back to the 70s, and ultimately were involved, as was the entire industry, in a disinformation campaign that led to this outcome of just insanity. And what do you put right in between all of that, quite frankly? 9/11, and then ultimately all things that have followed. And we'll get into it a little bit downstream, but the entire global currency, as the dollar as the world's reserve currency, revolves around this power strata. So anyway, that being said,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
did you
So,
how did you come to
well,
learn about the truth bombs?
you were on some list. Different friends were watching you, so I just it was referred to me, and as I initially just heard you, it seemed like you were seeing behind the veil. You were seeing, seeing reporting things that weren't in the mainstream media that seemed to make sense, though. And also, then I have to say, your documentary is fantastic.
Thank
It's
you.
wonderful. It's just great. I even love the music that you put with it. It just sets the tone. It's really good. Now I have to tell you, I haven't finished the last episode 5. I got delayed. I was like
That's
trying to
too
listen to
bad.
it at one and a
That
half
brings it
speed.
all full circle. But
Yeah.
so sweet of you to say that. Did it surprise you that Ohio was so central to our story?
Yes, because actually I lived in Akron, Ohio, and I graduated from Kent State, and I lived in Akron, actually it's personally, I had personal family interactions with those frauds that happened. So it was pretty shocking to me to realize, to look at the map and see that Ohio was targeted, that Ohio was part of the whole effort to do this fraud. I have some questions though about it. I don't know if this is a good time to ask questions about what I saw.
Ask away, but I do want to say for the audience writ large that what's important about what Karen had just prefaced was that many people might recall that the Midwest became the Rust Belt. And, Cleveland and Akron and the surrounding areas, of course, were an industrial powerhouse for much of our history, particularly following the Industrial Revolution. And by the time you get to the late 70s, there was a mass exodus of steel and jobs and vertical and things like that that had a tremendous impact that led to what we call the Rust Belt. But there was, which makes this whole thing so cynical, is that area in Northeast Ohio, but particularly Detroit also, and also Pittsburgh, a lot of the former industrialized powerhouse, the muscle, if you will, of American industrialization, because of its collapse ultimately through globalism and everything else and how it impacted the middle class, it became literally ground zero for what became the economy that I'm trying to reveal to the world, which is predicated on what we call financialization, which is
Yes.
predatory and then mapped out in everything that we reveal to you on the con. But please go ahead and ask me some questions, because I want to,
Well,
I'm learning from you, and this is really intriguing because I want to find out what you know versus what I'm trying to convey, because everybody in the country has to get their heads around this information.
yes, well, first of all, I knew nothing. I knew nothing about, pretty much nothing about the stock market and Wall Street, because my family had been hurt by the stock market, and I just considered it gambling. To me, it just looked like it was just gambling. It was ridiculous. And so I stayed away from it. I didn't pay attention to it. I never listened to the financial news. I kept in my lane, which is environment and climate change and conflict resolution and peacemaking and communication skills. That's what I did. I helped to set up peer mediation programs in schools and things like that. So I was doing my bit for world peace, and yet I didn't. Watching your documentary, the first thing I realized was that there's a concept of freedom in America. People like at a climate walk one time, a guy came up to me and said, "I burn a lot of gas. I have a lot of big cars, and I should be able to. You're not going to stop me from owning any or buying anything I want if I can afford it. That's freedom." So it's really interesting to me that a sort of Wild West idea of freedom, which is really fictional because we live in a society, we can't have that. No one really wants that, but that's what they think they want. And yet that's what was applied to the financial sector. The whole financial sector was like let loose into this Wild West kind of mentality of freedom, of unregulated free market, or whatever the words are. But that's what I saw in the beginning of your documentary was that this, and also in Bill McKibben's book. Bill McKibben, he's a climate advocate.
Bill McKibben opened up my movie in Manhattan during the climate march back in 2012. No, 16. I was in Manhattan with like 400,000 people marching for climate change. It was before Trump, so what am I talking about? It must have been back in like 2014. It was 2014.
Were you on any other climate marches or peace marches? Because that's
I've
where
been
I thought I
involved
might
with
have
all sorts of stuff for a long time, but
met you. Okay.
I know Bill McKibben well because that ties into this. I made my first film was called Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream. That I've been on this nonstop mission forever to demonstrate to the American people that you don't live in a free market economy, and I'll get into that, but
Yeah.
we have all of the solutions, but you have to, for example, you need to understand that the reason we don't have that economy that you know is possible is because of what is jamming up everything in between, which is what I reveal, which is the con. So if I can get folks like you and the millions of people like you, and quite frankly, the people you prefaced, because they're part of this too. Let me just point this out real quick. So you live in Ohio, you have a libertarian bent, just like we do in the
No,
West.
no, 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 no. I'm not libertarian at all.
No, no, I know you're not. I'm just saying in general, people, that's the freedom idea, right? It's like I can do whatever I want. I can buy a gas
I'm
stove.
saying I identified that, but I think it's fictional, but I mean, it's not healthy.
Right. But my point
Yeah.
is that people
Yeah.
think that's the way that they don't like people telling them what to do first and foremost. Okay. But what you have to understand is that tied to the collapse of our financial uh, entire engine based on fraud, which is what we reveal,
Mhm.
it tied to the white working class that had been in the factories their whole entire lives, whose pensions were directly tied to this fraud that blew up the world that we reveal. So, what they don't understand is that they have been targeted too by this predatory financialized engine that connects what you saw, and most importantly, when you talked about regulation, and that what led to all of this stuff is what we call deregulation. Was
Yeah.
the what was the nature? What is deregulation? Imagine if you go into a city and find out that no longer are we going to have stoplights, no longer are we going to have,
Right.
you know,
Any
government
kind of speed limits.
government agencies that are going to regulate safety and protocol with airlines or with elevators or with escalators, things can fall apart very quickly. And
Mhm.
so that's exactly what happened in our capital markets based on
Yes.
the largest consumer market that exists, which is our homes, and which is what the entry point to what our entirety is. But on the other side of that, though, again, what we end up revealing is how the government and how our financial system circles the wagons to completely obfuscate, hide, cover up, and diminish everything that happened so that we could provide tens of trillions of dollars illegally to the people that did it. That's the
Yeah.
con. And that's what you're going to see in episode 5, by the way. But there's so much more. But anyway, I'll stop there and I'll let you continue because
Well,
go ahead.
how do you even make a dent with people when they're, for instance, I know a family, my friend's parents, who lost his entire pension. It just disappeared, evaporated in a day. I don't know if it was tied to this. I think it was, but it was the company just sort of went bankrupt and folded and didn't offer. He had worked like 30 years as a truck driver. And
It was connected to this. Did he happen to
but
did he happen to work with Mountain States? Or not Mountain
he's
States,
in
Central States?
he's in Kentucky, but he's like a Trumper, and he thinks that he thinks it's the government that did it to him. He doesn't see it as like the pain that you mentioned. The largest consumer markets were their homes, and the working class were hurt by this fraud. So the pain from that was translated into this support for a populist person like Trump, which is promising things that he's never going to deliver. He's just saying the words that sound good to them.
Can I address that real quick to the best of my
Yeah.
ability?
Yeah.
Okay, so about I'll send it to you, but I want everybody who's watching this to understand that I had one of the leading experts in the country, if not the world, on how pensions are completely raped by Wall Street firms and money managers and how they do it and how the states are involved with it.
Yeah.
So the initial Tea Party.
Wait, where do I see that? What is that, a video you
It's
said?
one of my truth bombs on
Oh,
Patrick Level
okay.
Truth Bombs the Con, and it's with a guy who used to head up the Securities and Exchange Commission,
Okay.
who regulated all of the pensions in the country. And anyway, I'll send it to you, but I'll make everybody aware of it too in the line item in the comment, or excuse me, in the
Okay.
description here.
Okay.
But the reason it's important is because what you identified is, again, so part of the con. Okay, so first and foremost, and I'm sure you've heard this, and I know you had addressed communication before, and sometimes it's hard to hear when I yell because I'm yelling at particular people like that need to listen. Because what they don't understand is A, the entire government right now is demonstrating through 91 indictments that, in a nutshell, Donald Trump defrauded the United States using deceptive acts and practices through racketeering, specifically through the fabrication of business records, falsification of business records that are all illegal. And this is all prevalent in the in the hush money trial, in the civil fraud trial, in the racketeering trial down in Fulton County, Georgia. And yet the government did not exercise the exact same laws for all things that I reveal in the con, which was so monumentally larger. It's like comparing a baseball to the size of the sun. Now, Donald Trump is a conduit, and he's also a red carpet reflection of everything that I'm talking about to your Trump MAGA supporting cousin, uncle, whomever, who thinks the government did it. But here's the thing: the government did do it. The government did it because of over 4 decades of what we call neoliberalism that fostered deregulation. So you have a thing called the revolving door between all of our top law firms, all of our financial firms, and all of our government. So Congress, the Supreme Court of the United States, all of the judiciary, they all work through ultimately the fountainhead of the Federal Reserve that can provide tens of trillions of dollars of liquidity illegally, which is what your friend Patrick Lovell has proven because of the nature of the statutes of Federal Reserve Act 13.3 that enabled backdoored tens of trillions of dollars to a criminal racketeering enterprise. Now, let me take this back to Ohio. The miracle of Ohio. What we discovered in the con through Addie Polk, through her tragedy, where she shot herself in the chest 5 times because she was being evicted from a house she had lived in for 4 decades that, as it turns out, she owned. Her house was stolen through the falsification of business records. However, through her tragedy, she opened the door to the Summit County, Ohio task force led by then Attorney General Mark Dan, who put together, as you saw in episode 1,
I know, it was great. It was
racketeering conviction of a guy
yeah.
by the name of Dave Willen, who was a regional player in a $60 to $80 million fraud that was the exact same thing that all of the CEOs, which I call the Dons of Wall Street, were involved with. Now, here's the thing that you're going to see in episode 5, by the way.
It's continuing. I know.
How do I know all of that? By the way, what you're looking at in the con is the first 5 episodes is half of what I have. I've got a lot more information that, but what you'll find out in episode 5 is I got the information directly from the top guys at the Department of Justice, the top guys at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the top guy at the FBI, who told us they were all forced to stand down
I'm at that part right now.
so that Wall Street could get away with the RICO, the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history that never ended, that led to $71 trillion being fed to the criminals that got away with it. Now, to put that into perspective, Donald Trump couldn't come up with 484 million. He's down to 175 million. But think about that. If Donald Trump were the Fed, and I think this is a big reason why he's running for president, because if he was, you just turn a switch and you give yourself trillions of dollars. That's what they've done. the big facade here that your buddy, your colleague, and your friends and everybody. My question to you is: when you understand that the entire system guarantees corruption with socialism because it's the full faith and credit of the United States that provides the liquidity to these racketeering engines, and all of the details are in the con and everything else I put out. Do you think, Karen, that there's a more moral, a more ethical, a more precise and smart way to budget $71 trillion? The entire the entire GDP of the United States is about 25 trillion. 71 trillion. Is there a better way right now, given what you do in all aspects of your life, is there a better way to spend $71 trillion?
Then what? Then
The fraud that constitutes everything we're talking about.
what? Oh yeah. I mean, it's a tragedy. It's a waste.
It's 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 a monumental betrayal of
Yeah, it's
everything that
like
we
the value of our country just being sucked away
by
constantly.
by what?
Thinking,
Corruption.
well, that's yes, but when you say that even the FBI was told to stand down, like told, what is this are you saying international? That's what I noticed watching your documentary. Huh? Well, watching the documentary, you start to say, this sounds like a conspiracy theory, but he's talking to the actual people who were in those positions,
Right.
and their names and faces are on here. It's not a conspiracy, it's a real conspiracy.
That's right. That's called racketeering. See,
Yeah.
we have statutes called the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization Act that were evolved and developed through none other than Rudolph Giuliani, who is actually being convicted or indicted on racketeering right now in Georgia because of documentation fabrication and fraudulent documents in the electioneering scheme to steal the election. Where do you think they all learned this from? What I'm talking about. That's the whole point. When you lie on
A
documents,
couple points.
okay, but let me just
Oh my-
finish this point quick. When you lie on documents and you do it at the highest levels to where you destroy the law and all the judges are in on it. So, for example, right now, we just saw the Supreme Court justices, the Republican ones, are doing everything they can to prevent us from getting a trial on an insurrection that we all saw. It's pretty ridiculous, is it not? Okay, now multiply that by 71 trillion when we have a. My point to you is, look, I'm driving the clean New Deal because of the information I have. When you get through episode 5, you'll see that this is exactly what we did after the Great Depression through a gentleman by the name of Ferdinand Pecora, who recalibrated the United States because we learned all of the crime that created the Great Depression. And then we created what was known as the Glass-Steagall Act, and then that separated commercial banking from investment banking, so you couldn't have the fraud. And then ultimately, we created the Securities and Exchange Commission, whose entire mandate is to police, just like you have cops on the street corners that prevent people from mugging people or stealing old ladies' purses. We prevent guys in pinstripe suits, bespoken suits, from stealing tens of trillions of dollars from the country. That's the whole purpose. But because of what we show you in the con, of course it was a conspiracy. And we show you exactly how the conspiracy works. And then we prove that they stole $70 trillion. So what I'm trying to get the American people to understand is your Supreme Court's corrupt. The Department of Justice is corrupt. Congress is corrupt. Everybody knows it, but they need to know who did what, when, and how, what they got away with. Because if we're going to create a clean New Deal, which if you go back to the New Deal, that's exactly what FDR's administration did in the aftermath of the Great Depression. And so we have to do it again. We have to, A, we got to hold the bad guys accountable. And B, we got to get everybody to understand $71 trillion is the starting point. And I'll finish with this thought on this point. To rebuild the energy infrastructure grid to go to 100% renewable, maybe in the $4 to $6 trillion range, to reconfigure the entirety of the United States. Do you think we can spend a better allotment of capital with $71 trillion than for bad guys raping and pillaging the country?
Yeah, and it's absolutely essential. I mean, my line of work, we're talking about preventing human extinction and the destruction of our civilization. You know, we want to preserve the treasures of civilization for the future. And if we don't do, and we have a very small window of opportunity to act. And if we don't accomplish what we need to accomplish, the future will not have a chance to do what they can do, to come up with innovations that can
Can we
hopefully.
get the whole country to reconfigure itself based on logic from your experience? Have they been okay? So there you laugh. So
Well,
how about we
yeah.
reveal to them that we've had $71 trillion stolen from us by a tiny group of people that have
Mhm.
betrayed everything? So if you think Donald Trump's bad, he's a tiny player in comparison to what I'm saying. That doesn't say that he's not completely guilty of everything he does. He is. But he's a tiny player. That's what I'm trying to express to you. Because the Department of Justice, just so you know, they have unbelievable resources. Not only could they take down Trump in a nanosecond if they chose to, and Trump's been guilty of this stuff for 4 decades, but they could take down the entire system. But they haven't because of why?
They're infiltrated, I guess.
Exactly. By whom do you think?
International billionaires. I don't know.
So that serves international billionaires, and that's part of it. But that's no, it's they have they have appointments. So, for example, Barack Obama, a president I voted for twice, who wrote in on the change we can believe in paradigm and just did
Yeah.
the opposite because he put all the bad guys that created the disaster back in charge. And he put a guy by the name of Eric Holder in charge of as the attorney general, the top law enforcement official in the United States, outside of course, the president, who was the first African American attorney general who came out of a law firm called Covington and Burling. Covington and Burling is one of the top white shoe law firms in the United States. They've got obviously offices in Manhattan. They're very affiliated with the financial system. They underwrote all of what we called robo signing back in the day, which was a giant, giant grip that destroyed tens of millions of people. But Covington and Burling also, all the people that you talked about, and it all extended from the savings and loan crisis and that sort of thing. But Covington and Burling put this African American genius into a position to not bring charges against Wall Street. And after he finished his 8-year position, he rotated out again back to Covington and Burling to the corner office where he got a $12 million a year salary, which is monumentally larger than what he was getting paid at the Department of Justice. And I think he got a $30 million bonus. Now, I don't know that for a fact. I'm just going back in the reservoirs of my mind. But yes, infiltrated is the right connotation. And just recently, Eric Holder told MSNBC, listen, the United States institutions aren't going to save you, meaning that because of the Supreme Court corruption, it's up to you, the people, to vote Trump down, right? Pretty funny coming from a guy that let Wall Street get away with destroying tens of millions of people. That's the problem. We've got corruption from beginning to end at the top levels of our agency. So now that's the story. I've got the clean new deal. Tell me how that's resonating with you and what your criticisms are, because I've seen you, say some comments that, Patrick, nobody can hear you when you're yelling.
Yeah. It just, your truth bombs are great, and it's good information. It's new information, surprising information a lot of times, and just seeing through your eyes because of your experience, seeing the way you are seeing current events is really helpful.
Thank you.
But then toward the end, you get so frustrated. You're like, why aren't you listening to me? Why aren't you? And I'm just, as a listener, I'm like, well, I am listening to you. I'm trying to understand it. I'm trying to understand what I'm supposed to do to help you, and what your vision is of how this can be unraveled. I know the Clean New Deal, but with all of these departments that would normally take care of this all infiltrated or compromised in some way, then how is it going to be accomplished? And if your image is millions of people out on the streets, I mean, I would tell you that the corporatocracy has had over 50 years, 50, 70 years now to come up with responses to public demonstrations that nullify their power. So sure, they let them march and just shutter the windows until they're passed, and then they go about their business, and so does the government. So it's not, that's not the effective method so I don't know what, and
That's
also,
magnificent. That's a magnificent question and answer, but let me address it.
and are you collaborating with anyone who's already working on corruption in government, such as Move to Amend? Have you heard of them?
Yes, of course I have. In fact, I started them, and there's a whole bunch of story there as well that's ridiculous because of other relationships I've had. So to the
Oh
audience,
boy,
I've been
okay.
a producer and an investigative journalist and a lot of things for decades now, okay? And
Yeah,
what we did, and again, I didn't poof the con into existence. That cost $4.5 million to get
I
this
believe it.
$1 trillion truth. It is the greatest ROI in the history of the world because, again, the Department of Justice, the FBI, the SEC, and all of these agencies operate to the tune of $90 billion a year with tens of thousands of employees, and they didn't do their job on behalf of the United States, which I prove in the con. In addition to that, media didn't do its job because I had to tell the con that nobody told the full story, and they have tens of thousands of employees and a billion-dollar apparatus. So your point is exactly right. So this is what I've been trying fervently to get people to understand. And I deeply, deeply appreciate the question, Karen. But I say it all the time in my truth bombs. And this is so revealing to me how hard it is for people to get there and to fully understand what I'm gestating here. I have said over and over and over, we need a clean new deal. And I define the clean new deal as you got to have a Glass-Steagall now, which is what we did after the Great Depression, which is based on everything we show you in the con, which you separate the most dangerous three letters of finance, other people's money, which gets rid of the casino capitalism, of predatory capitalism, financial capitalism based on racketeering, and you make that impossible. Plus, you got to do a lot of sub parts where you have to have aligned incentives and you have to have outcomes. But again, you have to have the what am I looking for? What is the word? The enforcement apparatus do its job. It has to do the investigation, and we destroyed, which we show you in the con, the apparatus of regulation, which you identified early, which means to the regular person out there, imagine if your street lights didn't work. Imagine if 70,000 planes fell out of the sky at the same time. Imagine if every ship you ever saw just sunk at the same time. We do the equivalency in our financial system. So you might be saying to yourself, well, wait a second. If nobody's doing anything about this who has the resources and the capacity to do it, how are you, Patrick Lovell, going to get us to join you to do this? Well, we know that tens of millions of people have been destroyed by this. We know that everybody has somebody in their family that had a connection to some sort of financial fraud that blew up their pension or their houses or whatever, if they've been on this earth long enough. And if they're young people, then it happened to their parents. They need to understand the who did what, when, and how, which is the con that everybody can see for free. We made this monumental truth free because all the American people buy our lies at www.thecon.tv. So you've got to spread the word first and foremost. But what we have to do is we have to get millions of people together in Washington, D.C. to surround the Supreme Court. That's more likely than now because of everything that's happened with Roe. It's also the corruption that we're seeing in SCOTUS because of Clarence Thomas and Alito and the Republican side, because they are not holding Trump accountable for the insurrection. So there are a lot of groups that are in that space, and I hear from them all the time. But they have to be able to understand that it's not just SCOTUS. It's because we also, in addition to getting a new Glass-Steagall, we have to get rid of Citizens United. Citizens United enables dark money to pay for everything that we're under the thumb of. To give you an example,
that's what Move to Amend is about. Yeah.
We got to get rid of it. We got to destroy corruption, which is the legalization of corruption. Because Donald Trump, for example, all he had to do was use an LLC through a front group to be able to make the hush money payments to Stormy, and nobody would have been the wiser. He's so stupid and lazy, he didn't even know how to use those rules in 2014, 15, based on Citizens United. But he's the red carpet of everything, and I have to thank Trump for doing that. But at the bottom line is that you got to get rid of Glass-Steagall, and people need to understand the monumental fraud that took place. So you've got to surround SCOTUS. We got to surround the Department of Justice, who let this go on, because The Department of Justice has become a tool for the corruption on Wall Street and our financial system. And we have to surround the Federal Reserve that actually makes it all possible. Because I said earlier, using Federal Reserve Act 13.3 illegally through the statutes to provide tens of trillions of dollars of liquidity to a bankrupted financial apparatus that got there through racketeering. So you've got to do those three things. And there's literally, we know that there was at least 16 million filed foreclosures. If you take the mean range of that era, 2008 to 16, that's over 50 million Americans, plus the tens of millions of Americans that got destroyed by their pensions, and then the millions of more around the world. If we've got 1 million people to DC, which is 10%, not even 10% of the number, I think it's about 150 million-ish, that we could surround all of these agencies and then pilgrimage to the National Mall underneath the gaze of Abraham Lincoln, who, of course, after the Gettysburg Address, and while we created that monument to begin with, is what it says in the marble: a nation of, by, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. Once we get there, and I can demonstrate, because I have all the answers, I've got thousands of pieces of information, I've got relationships with guys at the Department of Justice, FBI, the SEC, I've got everything that all of mainstream media has hid from us, including the New York Times, and we can present this to the world. And because I am a producer, I can film it all, and then I can make it available for free once we put the whole thing together. But as we're seeing with all of the protests on the campus, do you think anybody gets an attention unless they got everybody in the streets? That's what we have to do. We have to have people get out of their comfort zone, because as you said at the very beginning of this, Karen, you have seen firsthand that nobody understands what's happening in the climate atmosphere, and there is no time to lose. It's the story of the frog boiling in water. It's also the story of the scorpion getting on the back of the frog, and the scorpion says to the frog, "Can you get me across the river?" And the frog agrees to do it because he thinks, well, we'll both go down if he stings me. Halfway across, the frog stung him, and they go down, and he asks, "Why'd you do it?" And the scorpion says, "Because I'm a scorpion." That's the system. We've got to break the bonds of the system. And the thing is, it might sound impossible. We did it during the revolution to create separation of powers in the Bill of Rights. We did it during the Civil War to break the bondage of slavery. We did it during the Civil Rights Movement. We did it in World War II when we destroyed fascism. The American people have done this over and over and over. This battle never ends. It's between the greatest statement is, the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. Once you see the light, if you understand the truth, then you can actually destroy the tumor of corruption. That's how we handle cancer. You chemo the tumor. It's the same story over and over. And so that's what I'm trying to get people to understand. So you tell me how that can't happen.
So your image is of 1 million people or more standing and surrounding these places, and then having a rally where you can film it and present the information. So you're thinking the numbers is what will make it newsworthy, and then your message will get out further. Is that what
will
it
happen
is?
simultaneously on social media. If everybody hashtags Patrick Global, hashtags the $71 trillion truth, and hashtags truth is marching. Because and this is all in service of the clean new deal. In the past, usually what we did, so for example, and this is really where the whole idea comes from. After the Civil War, we had the robber barons, and the robber barons took over the United States until Teddy Roosevelt figured out the scheme with what was called trust busting. That was basically parallel to the efforts of the workers' progressive movements, the women's suffrage movements, the civil rights movements, and the environmental movements all converged to create the new, trust busting that then led to his cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, basically giving the same speech in Madison Square Garden in 1936, where he said, the infinite enemy of freedom and democracy is this system that I'm talking about. And he broke it with the New Deal. This is the American tradition. We have to do it again. But what we're all up against is everybody's on their phone. Everybody's looking down at their phone, responding to the outrage of Trump, the outrage of war, the outrage of a lot of things that are very, very um, frustrating and terrifying and all of the rest of it. But what people need to understand is all of it emanates from the corruption that I'm revealing. None of this can operate if we have integrity of the system. And as you know, you can't fly a plane without the integrity of the system. You can't have a ship float without the integrity of the system. A computer doesn't work without we live in 2024. I'm
Wait,
explaining basically elementary civic stuff to a country that has completely lost its mind.
and nobody studies civics anymore or knows how our country works at all. But okay, so let's back up to it's an American tradition. It's an American tradition to allow huge financial forces to rise and then have to redesign and recalibrate them each time. Is that what you're saying the tradition is?
No, every time that we're faced with enemies, the enemies of freedom and liberty that are tyrannical, tyranny. So whether okay, so you
Oh,
come,
but see, they've cast themselves as the ultimate freedom.
yeah,
You know, the
but
billionaires, like
people need to understand the greatest trick the devil ever played was to
yeah.
convince the world he didn't exist. And what I continue to say, because I channel movies, because I'm a producer, and one of the other great movies from the '90s, the greatest independent era of all time, was when in The Devil in a Blue Dress, Ezekiel Rollins was the character, and he said, "I got tired of them pissing on my head, telling me it's rain. They must have thought I was some kind of new fool." It's simply deception. It's all lies. It's
Well,
diabolical
I
lies.
know, but it's deep in the culture. It's deep in the psyche. This
Right. So we
idea
gotta
that
break.
that we have to revere the Elon Musks of the world. We have to revere Bill Gates. We have to revere them because they have billions of this
Elon Musk
dollar thing.
tripled his wealth during COVID. How is
Oh,
that
I know.
possible?
So
How is
many
it
of them did.
possible?
And
How is it possible?
Raytheon has now quadrupled its
Sure.
value
How is it
because of
possible,
war.
Karen? How is it possible?
How is what possible?
How did Elon Musk triple his
Oh,
worth during COVID? Did he sell triple the amount of Teslas?
I, I don't know.
No, it's everything I'm revealing to you. It's the financialization, it's the monetary policy, it
Yeah.
was the free money that goes into the system that created meme stocks and other stocks and hyperinflated assets, hyperinflated stock price, which is what
Well,
hyperinflated Elon Musk. That's what I'm telling you. We've provided 71 trillion before COVID. It was 2009. This has never happened before in history, just so you know.
so let me go.
Between 2009 and just hold on a second, 2009 to 2019, that was 71 trillion. That was up to 2019. We spent tens of trillions or more after that. And so on the front page of the New York Times, by the way, today, they're telling you the same thing I'm telling you, but guess what? They're not telling you. Everything else I'm telling you. By the way, meaning the fraud, the corruption, the racketeering, all of the stuff that made what goes into the sausage. Because, so again, you got to imagine this on the front page of the New York Times today, on the front page of the paper of record, above all of the campus protests, above all of the carnage of the Trump, show campaign, the joke show campaign, over the war in Ukraine and Israel and everything else, was what I'm telling you. It's on the front page at the highest levels, but guess who doesn't know how it all works?
What was the headline? What do you mean? What did
Okay,
it say? What was it about?
I'll read you the headline, but it's incredible what it's all about. So the headline, and I did a big article
So
on
it's
this
like so
on
it's like
X.
hidden
You
in
gotta
plain
check.
sight, you mean? Hidden in plain sight where it's blasted on a headline
Yes,
but nobody
yes,
understands what it
yes.
means?
Yes, exactly. It says here right in the front page on top of everything because of what happened yesterday at the Federal Reserve because of interest rates, because the whole interest, the investment community is waiting for that. And I'm going to have to look at another one because because my phone. So
You have to go?
no,
Is
no,
it
no, no.
what I don't know what time zone you're in, so
Yeah, no, I'm just going to read it to you just so you can read it
oh,
because you can hear it. Hold on one second. I got to go back to my profile. And I encourage everybody who hears this to go to X and read what I'm doing and read what I said about this and share it. So it says here on the front page of the New York Times, above everything else, it says the perils of the Fed's vast bond holdings. Okay. And it says the Federal Reserve is shedding assets at a glacial pace, exposing the financial system to continuing risks. Those continuing risks are everything that I just spent the last hour saying, and then I made the con and everything else. So my point being is, to your point, yes, hidden in plain sight. What I'm telling you is the emperor's new clothes on really bad acid. The American people can't see the forest for the trees. The truth is very simple. It's
And
not
then
it's not rocket science, it's racketeering.
Racketeering. Yeah, I got the slogans. And all these new young hotshots who are working in the financial sector, they think that's just how it works now.
That's right.
They don't even know there's a different way. They just think
Because that's what we show you in the con, because it's called control fraud. That's how the CEOs manipulate the whole thing. So please go ahead.
Uh, I just have I have so many questions.
Right.
One of them is, so your envision is 1 million people or more surrounding the Federal Reserve, Department of Justice, SCOTUS, then having a rally where you get to present this to the world, and then
Because
what would come of that would be sort of justice hearings where these people would be brought to justice, and their
great
wealth
question.
would be
Just
taken
really
away
quick.
from
Just
them
really
and
quick.
redistributed to the people they stole it from.
Okay, so I'll answer all those questions in a row. Great questions. The first thing is, everybody needs to understand what is to be able to change it. Okay, so why do you think we go look for a black box when an airline goes down?
Yeah, we want to understand the disaster.
You can fix the problem, right? So
Yeah,
this is
right.
the black box of all of it. But what do? I said, new Glass-Steagall now. So you separate commercial banking from investment banking. You end corruption through Citizens United. But because of who do I have in the con? Do I have access to all the top legal minds who've actually pursued this for decades and know exactly how to make this thing go down? Or do I not have the best, prosecuting attorneys and investigators and the highest
But
level whistleblowers?
many of them are retired, though.
Yeah, but that's okay, because there's many people that worked under them I've got the whole bailiwick. See, what people need to understand is the whole system isn't corrupt. It's just the guys that are in charge that control the system so that the corruption can get away with it. All we have to do, and Congress is the worst thing. Okay, so let me make this parallel. So
I wanted to say, I noted that. I wrote that down from when I was seeing in your series. It said Congress caved to the banks, and I thought, no, it didn't cave. It wanted to protect the banks because its money was tied in with that.
That's exactly right. So here's the way the game worked in terms of the housing crisis. So we used to have professionals that were underwriters that worked both in mortgages, and they were people that would determine how people would qualify for a mortgage. We got rid of that, and we basically got people that were working in fast food restaurants, and then we incentivized them with a lot of money on a lot of deals so that
I saw that. Can I make a point about that at some point?
Yeah.
I think that people, okay, we were told things like Countrywide, not Countrywide, Countrywide told my family that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were somehow subsidized by the government, and that's why people were allowed to get these loans, because it was sort of like this healthcare thing now, but it was help from the government to help people get into homes. And I think that people believed that because now the system that we had, there was a sense that it was unfair.
What you just described is fair. So yes, Fannie and Freddie Mac, all of what we call government-sponsored enterprises, came into being after the Great Depression, because what we needed to do was we needed to mitigate the risk of banks so that they didn't have to hold the mortgages on their books for 4 decades, and ultimately that would clog up lending. We wanted people to have houses, so we wanted to mortgage houses, especially because we had a burgeoning industrial middle class, so that we could grow the economy. So we created the government-sponsored enterprises, and what they are responsible for is pooling and packaging all of the collateral securities that all of these banks around the country are producing, that then go into mortgage-backed securities that then they guarantee with their stamp of approval. And what they do, they're supposed to do their underwriting standards, and then they guarantee through the full faith and credit of the United States, which is this colonization of what they call this government-sponsored industry that's a hybrid between independent Wall Street operations and then ultimately government-backed. But what they did was, because they were so absolutely huge, is they sold trillions upon trillions of dollars of these all over the world to sovereign wealth funds like China and Russia and everybody else. And ultimately, they didn't do their due diligence because everybody was moving these things fast and furious. But see, what the predators like Countrywide did, this is what they do with Donald Trump all the time. It's a key consideration. Donald Trump's entire formula is lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. That's what the Goomba, I shouldn't call him a Goomba, but he was, the tan, CEO of Countrywide, whose name will come back to me in just a minute, Angelo Mazzillo. And he even has like a character name, like he was in the mob. But ultimately, they were selling, and we show you in the con where he's like marketing it to Black African American families. Hey, we'll give you these loans, but they're all predation loans. They're liars loans. They were basically lying on the documents to basically make sure that the people could qualify based on what Fannie and Freddie were buying. So they created liars loans that they sold to Fannie and Freddie that were guaranteeing it. Get it? So when they blamed Fannie and Freddie, it's because they were making fees and billions of dollars on fees, generating the worst of the worst mortgages that blew up around the world and pensions around the world. Does that make sense to you?
Sort of.
So
I mean,
it's just lies and deception is the point. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the reason that people that it seemed sensible to people was because, or the people getting these loans, is because they knew that what had been was stacked against minorities, and we had redlining, we had different things that were unjust already. So when somebody sitting across the table from them says, well, it's okay if we just, if you claim that you make a little more than you do, they see that as, it's just, that's necessary to go around the rules because the rules are bad as it is. So it seemed normal to them. It seemed like.
Let me ask you a question. Should anybody ever lie? Just in general, should anybody ever lie?
Well, here's the thing.
No, let's just ask this. So like, let's just say, for example, I make $130,000 a year, and then I go and I say I make $230,000 a year. Should I be able to do that and not?
Well, let's put it down to this. Let's say you make $22,000 a year, and if you make $23,000 a year, you will lose your health insurance. Okay. And in order to afford your health insurance, you'll have to make 3 times as much instantly in order to afford it.
Okay, so let me give you an example of what was happening during the height of the liars loans. So we had undocumented workers in agriculture in places like Southern California that were making minimal money that were getting loans for $700,000 houses. How do you think that's possible?
But do you agree that
that's possible? How do you think that's possible?
Well, I saw in the documentary they even rewrote some of the terms. So I mean, they rewrote the documents
because the brokers were lying to make the figures look to what they could get approved. That was backstopped by Fannie and Freddie. Get it? Because they were getting a fee. They were getting incentivized to lie, steal, and deceit, and they were setting up that worker for failure. That's what they did.
Some of those people felt they were doing good. They felt they were helping people get into houses that they wouldn't be able to afford otherwise.
Because they were getting paid to do that, and they didn't have to actually worry about the consequences.
Right. Well, they didn't understand the consequences. The people that you talked about, the pizza guys.
And that's the law, and that's deregulation, and the CEOs knew how to do it. And so who do I blame? And I blame everybody in the system, but who needs to go down the hardest? The guy who's writing the mortgage at the front end? Yeah, but what happens if he flips? You can flip to the CEO. It's the CEO that needs to go down, okay? Because should we give, again, tens of trillions of dollars to con artists that rape the world when we could spend tens of trillions of dollars making a productive economy and capacity with new technology so that we don't destroy the world? It's a pretty easy equation, is it not?
Yeah, I think where we differ is that you want to restore balance and regulation to make capitalism the best it can be. And for me, I see that I see that corruption is endemic to the system of capitalism, that no amount of regulation, and even when it comes to the environment, we've seen the regulatory model has failed. What we need to do
Because
is
of
give rights.
corruption. Because of corruption. But have you ever heard me say that we live in a society that's capitalist?
No,
Is it capitalism that I just described?
well, I know, but so you have some idea of capitalism you want to restore or redesign or reestablish.
What is the definition of capitalism? What is capitalism?
It's money making everything go around. It's money being the center of everything.
But how does money make money? Is the question.
Yeah.
Is capitalism in its definition?
Yeah, money makes more money.
The very simple definition of capitalism is called risk reward. Have you ever heard that? Do capitalists who take big gambles end up being the guys at the top of the hill? Right?
Yeah, but it's fake. It's
not.
What
I just described to you. I described to you that it's not capitalism. Why? Because it's not risk. It's guaranteed. That's what I've just spent the last hour describing it in 492 truth bombs. It's guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the United States, which is what? What is that? If it's guaranteed by the government, if the government pays for corruption, what is that? In terms of the ism, in terms of ideology and everything else, it's going to spin this on your head for you, because I can already see in your sort of reaction what, I don't know if you know where I'm going with this.
I do. You want me to say it's socialism?
It is socialism. That's socialism for criminals. That's socialism. Where does it say in the definition of socialism, even though we all accept this? So, for example, let's take socialism to communism.
I mean, there are many countries that are democratic.
All isms are stupid at the end of the day without the integrity of the system, which is what I'm explaining to you. So let's just say,
all isms.
Yes. What do you know about Stalin? What do you know about the Politburo? What do you know? Is that socialism?
No.
No. I mean, by the way, is Putin social? Is he?
That's why I think we need to get away from the old isms, because they come with a lot of baggage and they come with a lot of misunderstanding, and they don't represent even the concepts.
It's corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate, like I've just laid out, that uses the full faith and credit of the United States, which is socialism, to guarantee the mafiocracy that is now creating fascism. Now, by the way, that's what happened in World War II. That was the 20s through the 30s. And ultimately, what's the difference between the United States, Germany, and Russia? Germany went the way of Hitler, Russia went the way of Stalin, and the United States went the way of exactly what I'm telling you. That's what the New Deal was. That's what we've got to recreate. So if you're asking me if I believe in socialism and all this other stuff, I understand that we have a hybrid economy. What do you think the military is? That's socialism. What do you think police are? That's socialism. What do you think, the guys out on the roads, fixing the street? That's socialism, okay? Based on taxes and how it works. That's the notion of it. So where is the free market? Oh, it's supposed to be the guys that do risk reward to drive everything forward. Are they driving anything forward?
You're saying they eliminated the risk.
Because that's the greatest trick the devil ever played, to convince the world he didn't exist, and they're pissing on your head telling you it's rain. So you have to come above the noise of confusion and deception to understand the details of corruption. And if millions of people understood that, could we recreate the world to save ourselves from the misery of tyranny?
So you're wanting to educate everyone.
Educate and activate. I want to electrify tens of millions of people, because the world I come from, if you lie, steal, and cheat, you got to go down. You can't lie, steal, and cheat and put me in bondage. That would be called slavery.
So are these people going to get put in jail, and is their money going to be transferred to people they stole from?
Very easily, if you make the case, because what are we seeing in Donald Trump's case right now? If the Supreme Court wasn't getting in the way. So
didn't they hide their money? Like they hide, that movie, The Laundromat? Like they hide it in Swiss bank accounts, they hide it in offshore accounts, and it can't, like that woman in your documentary who said the money's gone, we can't get it back. Her pension was, her husband's pension was gone. How would we ever recover it? I thought, well, money is mostly a click in a computer right now. It's not a physical thing.
Exactly. It's called fiat currency.
Why can't we just take the billionaires and just make their money worthless?
What am I explaining to you? Okay, so what is the value of money? What is the value of currency?
I guess I don't know what you want me to say.
Everybody's got to use it. It's the full faith in the currency. So can we use Chinese yen to go to the grocery store? Can we use Bitcoin to go to the grocery store? We got to use dollars. Okay. Now, let me ask you another question. So, do you think the United States, with all its technological immensity, or our resources, or our power and military and nuclear power, does none of that have value, or does it have value?
I mean,
It
the
has
petro.
tremendous value. The point being is that fiat currency is based on productive capacity. What I'm trying to reveal to you in the world is, if you had a thriving middle class in the real economy that was working to recreate the energy paradigm that, based on the law, everybody had in the way that we show you in the con, that you can't have underwriters hyperinflate assets like Donald Trump did in his stupid civil fraud trial, where he has a penthouse where he told the banks that it was worth, that it was 3 times larger than it actually was. And oh yeah, the bank didn't do any due diligence to figure out what. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. But
I remember that.
there's reasons why all of this happened. What I'm trying to tell you is that everything happens for a reason. Just like if you are going to plant, crops, the way you toil the soil, the types of seeds you use, the type of, what am I talking about? For all of the methodology that goes, there's a way that things can be done in a way that's fruitful, in a way that's done to destroy the outcome. What I'm revealing to the world is that we're destroying the outcome for the benefit of people that are above everybody else, which is the antithesis of why the United States was born in the first place. And oh yeah, am I aware that our founding fathers were flawed? Of course. Are Americans perfect? Or people perfect? No, we're always going to be flawed. But do we have planes that can fly? Have we gone to the moon and landed on the moon? Is the world the center of the universe, or are we part of this global celestial landscape? It's insane that it's 2024 and the world doesn't know this with all of the information. So I got to jump, but I got to ask you a question. Will you, after this conversation, share the truth, let people know we have the answers, be available for questions, recruit people to follow me because I'm the guy who has the answers? Now, does that make me walk on water? And do I think I want to rule the world? Do you get the feeling that I want to be some sociopath that controls everybody?
No, I get the feeling you're very passionate about what you want to convey. I would say there's some other better ways to convey it. Maybe, I mean, you've done a marvelous job, especially with the documentary. But I kind of like to see you take a teacher's approach, get a whiteboard, and start diving.
I've been on this journey now
Yeah.
for years, and nobody's listening because they're all buying lies. So this is my personality, and this is what I was put on earth to do. If you want to do that in your own way, I encourage you. If you
Well,
have,
I need you to check and see if I'm accurate. That's what I do with my climate scientists. I say, I'm going to present your information, but I need you to check.
but I'm not going to be all things to all people. And no, I
Yeah.
don't want to rule the United States. No, I want the country to be a dynamic powerhouse. Look, I was an athlete growing up my whole life, right? If I was a good outside linebacker, did that make me win the game for the team? No, I did my part. And all of us together, I happen to be the best outside linebacker on my team, but everybody else worked together as a whole to become as far as we'd go. I mean, that's why we celebrate champions in the United States. That's why it matters when you have, the Super Bowl or a World Series, because you don't cheat your way to winning that's what we celebrate. That's the whole point. But yet what we do in business and control of power is just the opposite. We have the liars and the cheaters and the grifters who give it to their children, which is called tyranny. That's the new aristocracy. The United States was born to revolt against King George III. We had a civil war against bondage. We had the New Deal. We had trust busting. We had the war against fascism. This is what I'm trying to tell America, that you have to become an American. This is why we got votes for women. This is why we got votes for Black people. This is why we got votes for anybody who wasn't a white male landowning gentry. This is the process of, in order to form a more perfect union, and education, everything that comes with it. If you don't have a dynamic, you can't get a dynamic, thriving society without the integrity of the law. And what my mission is on this world, in this process, is to destroy the corruption that destroys us, because I'm a competitor. So you might not like people who like to get into people's face and throw down with them, because that's not your style. But unfortunately, the bad guys do not care what you think. They only care at what they can get away with. And what I'm telling you is you got to destroy the guys getting away with the monumental crime of the millennium.
Okay. And I think the American people are really good-hearted and will rise as heroes when things are presented in a way that shows they're needed, that their personal input is needed. And that's my hope for climate change too. That's why I educate about climate change, is so there will be a more peaceful redesign of our systems without all this obstructionism.
So, did anything I do here today make you feel like I wasn't trying to propel you upwards to help you manifest what that outcome is?
No.
Okay, good. Because in your tonality, it kind of feels like, because I've got a strong personality, that the thing that you're reacting to and you have in your emails to me and it's like, dude, you can't shout at people to make them listen to you, but apparently you do. And the thing is, it takes all kinds. It's going to be me, you, and everybody you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in liberty and decency and dignity and sustainability and beauty, to come together out of our silos in unity to crush the corruption that is destroying us, which is our liberty from the tyranny. And that's what our destiny is. And I call that the Clean New Deal. Are you down?
Is the Clean New Deal written up somewhere? I can read it. Is it a document, a manifesto? Where is it?
I'll write it up for you, but I say it all the time and I've presented it in my work. So again, you know the con, right? What does the con tell you? What does the con tell you based on what you've seen so far? That the work has been done.
You know, it reminded me most of that Broadway show called The Producers, where they were betting on something to fail. They said they'll make more money if this show fails.
I love it. That's funny, but that's true. But no, but the reason I'm responding to the question, this is like, and this is what people need to understand. Yes, I say it in all of my text and all of my X tweets. I say it in all of my truth bombs. I've written it down, but I've got the con. The con is a $4.5 million introspection into this whole thing. So when you understand who did what, when, and how to what end, yes, we definitely have to have what you call the manifesto. I call it a declaration. It's a declaration of liberty and justice for all, just like we started back in 1776 and consummated in 1783. But the bottom line is, in the American tradition, you basically defeat tyranny. That's what this is all about, for the dynamism of liberty and justice for all. It's that simple. And that's not what we have in 2024. And we need, like every other situation, whether it was with the civil rights march. Okay, let me finish with this. Martin Luther King went to the National Mall after, obviously a movement in Selma and everything that happened in the civil rights era, when we had all of the media, looking into what happened at lunch counters and all of the things that happened with Rosa Parks and all of the speeches and the turmoil in the churches and everything else, to try to do what? Just make us live up to what we put down on paper. Culminating in 1964 with Martin Luther King giving the "I Have a Dream" speech in Washington, D.C. Why? To show the continuity, the cohesion of the masses that demanded from its government to operate on behalf of for and by the people. That's what my entire journey has been all about. When I figured out that we were not of, by, and for the people, we were of, by, and for the corruption that is destroying the people. So we have to go to Washington, D.C. We have to recreate this situation with all of the information, but to redeem the dream. That's what this is all about. And I need tens of millions of people to get on board if we're going to crush the corruption that's crushing us. Is there any other way to get to a climate? I mean, okay, so there's plenty of room for very thoughtful, intelligent, really beautifully poetic people to have sit-ins, to go to their local cafe, to go to their local bookstore, and demonstrate how locally we can do some fantastic stuff. I can assure you that part will not crush the corruption in DC.
Wasn't this what Occupy was about? And Occupy just disappeared and went away.
Guess how many Occupy encampments I went to during the filming of my first film?
A lot of them? I don't know.
Most of them, 23. Okay. And I landed in New York City the day the Occupy movement got crushed by the NYPD. Mm-hmm. You know what the biggest problem with Occupy Wall Street was?
It was too easy to infiltrate.
Part of it, but guess what they did? But this is exactly what you just said. Okay. And I experienced this. there wasn't enough people that got crushed by the housing collapse that were there because they weren't there. A lot of them went to the Tea Party, by the way. Okay. And that's a problem, just like your cousin and uncle that became MAGA. Okay. But ultimately, those that were like you, for example, that were thoughtful, beautiful, poetic people that believe in humanity and peace and everything else, they wanted to deal with the homeless crisis that was right in front of their face, which is
Right.
extremely important. And they did. But can you do everything at one time with little resources? They lost their track of what created the 99%, which is what I'm
Mhm.
revealing to you, which jettisoned me to go figure out the con, by the way. And then the last part I'll say about this too, though, going back to one of your other parts, as we're seeing on the campuses of Hamas and everything else, there is an element of Marxists that have been there forever. There are people that have been wanting a global revolution of Marxism forever. And the one thing that I will say to them is if you don't focus on the details of corruption, you will never penetrate the American psyche. Because the American psyche, like you just said, ultimately, they're like, I want to be free. I don't want to be told what to do. But if you tell them how their wife is cheating on them and you show them the elements of the evidence, there's a chance they might want to get out of that relationship.
But these strategies are easily played on us. You know, like you said, being more concerned about the homelessness that was right in front of them and they wanted to
Absolutely.
help. And you know, and right now people are, you know, of course concerned about the suffering of war that's right in front of them. So I feel like that's part of the strategy. That's part of how they keep us distracted. That's
And
part
you
of how they
nailed it. And you
keep
nailed
us
it.
from
That's
together.
exactly what they're doing. And who's they? Because here's the last thing I got to say about this. Okay. And you really need to understand this. And this goes to your sort of like hesitation about conspiracy. But I can guarantee you, and I've got the evidence of this, and I'll finish with this thought because I want to say this to all the people out there who might be listening, who might be supporting RFK. Okay. RFK Jr. on occasion captures me with some very thoughtful, salient points about the middle class and getting rid of corruption. But I know that RFK is also a concoction of Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson, and he gets onto this Neverland craziness with Trump and Putin, which is a whole nother side of this. Okay. But what I will say about the nature and the magnitude of what I'm going to reveal to you is it is the power in the shadows. Okay. We have got through this whole process because of the last 24 years. I'm going to reveal everything that happened at the Federal Reserve. That's the first part of it and the most important part of it. But the second part of it is, you know who put the emergency bailouts together for all of the banks that they called the consortium? It was a law firm called Sullivan and Cromwell. Do you know who Sullivan and Cromwell is? Sullivan and Cromwell is the same law firm that created the CIA. And oh yeah, by the way, have you heard of FTX or Sam Bankman-Fried? Do you know anything about crypto?
A
Okay, well,
bit.
see, this is part and parcel to it. They were deeply involved with Sam Bankman-Fried, and there's a huge deal that happened involving both political parties and crypto and Bitcoin and all sorts of stuff that's all connected to this. And you're, by the way, former representative who I know well, a guy by the name of Dennis Kucinich was enraptured in this stuff as well. But Sullivan and Cromwell, a guy by the name of Raj Cohen, who is the general partner of Sullivan and Cromwell, was interviewed by the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission, and he revealed that the reason that we expanded the credit box of Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which is the ability of the United States to be the lender of last resort in times of emergency. Okay, if we have a massive nuclear war, if we have a natural famine or whatever, that we always have the ability to create funds to get people paid to be able to go do what needs to be done. Nothing in those statutes ever said that Wall Street running a racketeering enterprise to basically loot and steal from millions of Americans was something that would be involved with the statutes, particularly because all of that collateral was worth nothing. And if you know anything about lending, you don't loan to somebody who has no collateral. But that's what we did to Wall Street because it was all worth zero based on what I'm talking about. And at the end of the day, it was Sullivan and Cromwell, which means the CIA. So the bottom line is when we get through this entirety, we're going to know as the American people who the CIA and the Federal Reserve works for. And once we get that answer, my friends, we've got the full picture.
Do you know?
Of course I do. They work Wall Street and the CIA have been handmaidens from the very beginning. That's why it was created, because so after World War II, we created the CIA to basically create all sorts of, and the antithesis to the KGB and the Cold War. But what they did was they worked with a lot of fascist regimes and a lot of criminal apparatuses as bulwarks to communism all over the world. South America, Central America. That this is a conjugate. So as above as below, and this is the last thing I have to say, because I gotta go. But look, the other giant revelation of what's happened in over the last 15 to 20 years, but that's come to a head recently, is while everybody's focusing on Trump, many people might be aware of a guy by the name of Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein, of course, many people understand, was the secretive guy that was running the sex trafficking ring on behalf of a lot of people think was the CIA or possibly Mossad, and he mysteriously dies during the Trump administration. It's just been revealed the last 2 weeks, even though it goes back 6 months, but it goes back 15 years, and this actually goes into Ohio as well. Jamie Dimon of Chase, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, and Leo Leonard, and all of these different hedge funds were all deeply immersed in financing all things Epstein. And at the same time, 2 years ago, basically there was this huge revelation called from the ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, that revealed through what we call FinCEN files, which is the process in which the banks are supposed to report to the Department of Justice money laundering, drug laundering, sex laundering, whatever money used for all of those purposes. They were all suppressed by the aforementioned. So Jamie Dimon and Chase were providing financing through your guy Wexler in what's it called? Where Ohio State is. Why can't I think of the big Columbus, which is where he was, the guy who owned, the Limited and all of those guys.
I've gone to the Wexler art gallery many times.
Right, that's where they all throw their money into art galleries. It's just like the guys that did it for the Sacklers, with the whole opioid meth, right? So they were all funding Epstein. So the thing, what I'm telling you is, as above, has there ever in your lifetime not been prostitution, drug running?
But wait, why they were funding him so that he could get leverage over various people to blackmail them?
Part of it. We could go into that. That could be another conversation. The only thing we need to be aware of for this conversation is that, you remember how you said that forever we've been offshoring and outsourcing profits in the Caymans and Switzerland, that sort of thing. The United States has become the biggest magnet for international laundering and terrorist organizations and everything else that run their money through our financial system.
Well, I have one idea for you, and that's, since I'm a librarian, I like to do book studies or film studies. So maybe we could do something like a book study, but it'd be of your film. So everybody watch the first one, and then we'll get together and discuss it on a Zoom call. I think that'd be a great way to learn about it.
I would love that. But it's been so nice to talk to you. I hope the audience got a lot from this. But again, we have to move tens of millions of people to Washington, D.C., probably by August. And it doesn't have to be elongated, sit in like the protests and all the universities. I just want to do like a weekend where we have everybody, where I present the truth, because I can film it all, I can edit it, and then I can make this all available. And if we get the attention of the Americans, then all of the tens of millions that didn't come can watch it and get their heads around it. Because I could go into why the presidential election has no answers to be able to handle this. If we had to vote today, I would vote for Biden. Okay. But the bottom line is, Biden is of by and for BlackRock, which protects the top 10%. And they're deeply, and they were the reason I got suppressed, because it was BlackRock that basically managed the 33 trillion back in 2009. That's how they became the biggest asset manager on the planet.
Well, this has been fascinating, and I hope we can do it again sometime, because I still have a lot of questions from watching the documentary.
I'm so grateful for your time.
Two of them.
I'm so grateful for your time. Let's keep it going, and let's share the word. And if any hesitation that you have, but this has been very helpful for me as well, because what you represent, I think, is the same sort of psychology that is represented by the millions of people that I've got to reach. And if they're not hearing
Yeah,
they're not seeing it, then they can't act upon it. But like anything else, it's a pitch, man, to try to get people on involved. I've already done the work to prove it, and you know it because you've seen it. So that's what it's all about. So I'll finish this
yeah,
like I do everything else.
I
Failure
appreciate
is
it.
not an option. Onwards and upwards. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. This is the righteous grind. Failure is not an option. Thank you. Be well.
Thank you. Failure's not an option. Bye-bye.